When the elders raised their machetes, I held my breath. The wind howled through the palm trees, swirling dust around us like a warning. Just as the machetes began to swing toward Chibuzor and Adaku, a deafening thunderclap split the sky, and a bolt of lightning struck the ground right between them and the elders. Sparks flew, and the air felt thick, humming with something that sent chills down my spine. I watched as the elders' faces went from anger to fear in seconds. Their hands shook, and they lowered their machetes, looking around at each other, unsure what to do next. The village had never seen anything like this before. The priestess, Adaku, was meant to remain pure, devoted to the spirits that kept our people safe and prosperous. But no man was allowed to touch the priestess, let alone fall in love with her. Their love had been whispered about for weeks, and when they were discovered, everyone knew that punishment was inevitable. But now, it seemed like the gods had something else in mind. The village elders took a step back, their faces pale. They muttered among themselves, their voices shaky as they tried to make sense of what had happened. The elder chief spoke up, his voice trembling, "This is a sign. The gods are angry. We must take this too and seek guidance." Chibuzor held Adaku's hand tightly, his eyes filled with fear and defiance, a love so strong that even the threat of death hadn't shaken him. Adaku looked just as determined, standing by his side, her eyes fierce despite her trembling body. The villagers, who had gathered around to witness the judgment, gasped and murmured among themselves. Some nodded in agreement, seeing the thunder as a sign, while others shook their heads, clinging to the belief that Adaku's love for Chibuzor was a betrayal of our traditions. The elders instructed 2 guards to escort them to the sacred hut, a place where no one but the priestess was ever allowed to enter. They would stay there overnight, guarded and watched, until the council could decide their fate. As Chibuzor and Adaku were led away, lightning continued to flash across the sky, illuminating their faces, etched with a strange mix of hope and sorrow. The elders, visibly shaken, lowered their weapons. Some tried to speak, but words failed them. The rain softened, and a hush settled over the crowd. In that silence, Chibuzor spoke of a love greater than any anger, a love that forgives and gives life. He told us about Christ, about how he came to save, not condemn, and that we could have hope, a new beginning if we would believe. Adaku's face was radiant, even as tears streamed down her cheeks. She looked around at the villagers, her people, and whispered, "Jesus is the God I choose to serve." That night, I could barely sleep. My heart felt heavy with fear for them, and yet, there was something I couldn't deny. Their love was pure, a kind of love you rarely saw in the village, where marriage was often arranged for alliances rather than affection. I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, the gods had indeed blessed them. But I feared what the morning would bring, for the elders were known to be unforgiving. Who is Adaku? Where did she come from? Does she have family members? It was a night no one in the village would forget. The air was thick, almost suffocating, as though it was bracing itself for something unnatural. Heavy clouds loomed over the land, and even the animals hid, sensing that something sacred, or cursed, was about to happen. The village midwives had gathered at the edge of the forest. Adaku's mother, an unmarried young woman, was in labor, and according to the elders, the child she bore was marked. For years, the village had been plagued by misfortunes, poor harvest, mysterious illnesses, and an unsettling sense of doom that lingered like a shadow. The elders had consulted the chief priest, who warned that a birth was coming, one that could either bring salvation or destruction. They said the gods had chosen this child for something significant, something beyond ordinary human fate. As Adaku's mother lay on a straw mat, writhing in pain, the sky opened up. Thunder roared, shaking the trees, and lightning flashed, illuminating the forest in sudden burst. The midwives whispered prayers under their breath, clutching their charms and amulets. No one had seen anything like it before, a storm without rain, raging as if the gods themselves were waging war in the heavens. Then, in the middle of the thunder, a sound emerged, a piercing cry that cut through the noise. Adaku was born. The midwives gasped when they saw her. Adaku's skin had an unusual sheen, and her eyes, bright and alert, even as a newborn, seemed to stare directly into each person's soul. There were whispers that her gaze was unsettling, that it held knowledge far beyond her age. One midwife claimed she saw an aura around the baby, faint but unmistakable, like a veil of light. The elders were called immediately. They observed the baby in silence, their faces grave. One of the eldest priests murmured, "This child is not ours to raise." The village chief nodded solemnly, and it was decided that Adaku would be dedicated to the gods. Her mother, weakened by the birth, was taken back to the village, and Adaku was left in the shrine, alone, under the watch of the chief priest. The villagers accepted this decision with a mix of fear and relief. They believed the gods had marked Adaku for a purpose that was beyond human understanding. To some, she was a blessing, to others, she was a curse. But everyone agreed on one thing: Adaku was no ordinary child. From that day on, Adaku lived within the shrine, isolated from the rest of the village. She was forbidden to play with other children or even to leave the shrine's grounds. Her life was devoted to the gods, and the chief priest raised her to understand her sacred duty. He taught her the rituals, the prayers, and the ancient stories of their people. She learned to interpret signs, to listen to the voices in the wind, and to sense the presence of spirits. Adaku's childhood was a strange one. She spent most of her days in silence, watching the world through the shrine's narrow windows. She saw the villagers from a distance, heard their laughter, and sometimes caught glimpses of children running and playing. She wondered what it would be like to be one of them, to live a life without sacred duties or divine expectations. But she knew that was impossible. She was different, set apart. The villagers feared her as much as they revered her, and that fear kept her at a distance. Despite her isolation, Adaku felt a deep connection to the world around her. She could sense the life in the trees, the whispers of the wind, and the subtle shift in the earth when something was about to happen. The chief priest once told her that these gifts were the gods' way of communicating with her, that she was their chosen vessel. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, Adaku wondered if it was a gift or a burden. When Adaku was 13, a mysterious illness swept through the village. The chief priest declared that it was a punishment from the gods, that the people had become lax in their devotion. He insisted that Adaku perform a cleansing ritual, one that required her to fast for 3 days and then spend an entire night in the sacred grove, praying and asking for forgiveness on behalf of the village. That night, as she knelt in the grove, Adaku felt something strange. A chill ran down her spine, and she felt as though she was being washed. She looked around, but there was no one there. Then, a voice, a soft, almost inaudible whisper, spoke to her. It was not the voice of the chief priest or any of the villagers, it was something ancient, something that filled her with both fear and awe. Adaku, the voice said, "You are more than what they say you are. You are bound to us, yet you are meant for something greater." The voice faded, and Adaku was left in silence, her heart pounding. She wanted to ask questions, to understand what the voice meant, but she knew better than to speak of it. The chief priest would only tell her that she was imagining things, that the god spoke in ways beyond human understanding. But from that moment on, Adaku felt a restlessness within her. She began to question her role, to wonder if there was something more to her life than serving the gods in the shrine. She kept these thoughts to herself, knowing that any hint of doubt would be seen as a sign of disobedience. Years passed, and Adaku grew into a young woman, graceful and poised, yet still bound by the traditions of the village. One night, she had a dream, a vivid, unsettling vision that stayed with her long after she woke. In the dream, she was standing in a field, surrounded by darkness. A white bird appeared, its wings glowing with an ethereal light. The bird flew toward her, circling her head before landing on her shoulder. As it perched there, it whispered in her ear, "Your path is not what you think it is. You are called for something beyond this life." Adaku woke with a start, her heart racing. She knew the dream was significant, but she didn't understand its meaning. She tried to dismiss it, to tell herself that it was just a dream, but the image of the white bird lingered in her mind, haunting her. Then Chibuzor came into her life, and everything changed. Chibuzor was unlike anyone Adaku had ever met. He was kind and gentle, yet strong in his convictions. He spoke of a God who loved unconditionally, a God who didn't demand sacrifices or rituals, but who simply wanted a relationship with his children. Adaku was drawn to his words, to the peace that radiated from him. For the first time, she felt understood, seen, in a way that the villagers never saw her. Their love was forbidden, and they both knew it. But Adaku couldn't help herself. She felt a pull toward Chibuzor, a desire to break free from the life she had always known and to embrace something new, something that felt real and true. Their meetings were secret, hidden from the watchful eyes of the village. But no secret could remain hidden forever. Where did he come from? The first time I saw Chibuzor, I felt a chill run through me. He stood alone in the village square, a tall, quiet man with eyes that looked like they could see right through you. People whispered as he passed, some fearful, some in awe. But what struck me most was the way he looked at Adaku, our priestess. It was not with fear, nor reverence, but with a strange kind of compassion, as if he already knew the pain in her heart. Adaku, our village priestess, had been chosen from birth, just like Chibuzor. But her destiny was one of strict obedience, of rituals and sacrifices. She'd been raised to believe in the power of the gods we served, the gods that demanded loyalty, that brought curses upon those who disobeyed. For years, Adaku had been the village's connection to the spirit world, someone we feared and revered in equal measure. But Chibuzor was different. He didn't belong to our village, he was from far away, from a town where, we later learned, he had been born to a powerful juju priest. His father had intended him to take over the family's practices, to become a respected juju priest, feared and consulted by the people. But Chibuzor had chosen a different path. The story of Chibuzor's birth was one shrouded in mystery, but from what he shared with us, it seemed his mother had prayed over him every night, asking that he would serve a higher power. She was a quiet woman, they said, a woman who secretly believed in a God that no one in their village spoke of, a God that didn't demand sacrifices or rituals, but simply faith and love. She never dared to speak of it openly, but each night, while Chibuzor's father was asleep, she would sing hymns softly over him, praying that he would grow up to know that God. One night, when Chibuzor was still very young, his father went into the spirit world to communicate with the gods, as he often did. He returned pale and shaken, claiming that the gods had shown him a vision of his son standing in front of a great crowd, speaking words he could not understand. "He is not one of us," he told Chibuzor's mother. "He is marked for something else." From that day on, Chibuzor was treated differently. Though his father tried to train him in the ways of juju, Chibuzor felt an inexplicable pull away from the traditions of his family. As he grew older, Chibuzor felt a calling, one that took him far from his father's house and led him to study under a group of traveling missionaries. They taught him about the love of Christ, about grace and redemption, and he was baptized in secret, dedicating his life to spreading the gospel. His father disowned him when he found out, cursing him and warning him that he would never find peace. But Chibuzor left, carrying only his faith and the memory of his mother's hymns. Over the years, Chibuzor traveled from village to village, sharing the story of this new God, a God who did not ask for blood or fear, but for faith and love. He was met with hostility, skepticism, and sometimes even violence, but he didn't stop. And slowly, people began to listen. He converted 2 entire villages, places that had once been steeped in juju and dark traditions, and he taught them to live in peace and forgiveness. He was known as the man who brought the light, and stories of him spread far and wide. Then, one night, Chibuzor had a dream. In the dream, he saw a small village surrounded by dense forest. There was a young woman there, dressed in white, standing alone in the middle of a clearing, her hands bound. She looked at him with eyes full of sorrow, and he felt her pain as if it were his own. He knew it was a sign, he had to find her. This was how he came to Udo village, our village, a place known for its fierce loyalty to the old gods and its strict adherence to tradition. He arrived quietly, saying he was simply passing through, but it didn't take long for him to realize that Udo was no ordinary village. People avoided him, whispering behind his back. They warned him about Adaku, the priestess who had never been allowed to know love or happiness, who had been raised to be the village's link to the gods. The villagers grew uneasy when they saw how Chibuzor looked at her, and they whispered that he was trying to bring curses upon them. But he didn't listen. He reached out to Adaku in secret, offering her friendship and a chance to speak freely, something she had never known. For the first time, Adaku was able to ask questions about the life she had been forced into, and Chibuzor listened without judgment. He spoke to her of hope, of a God who didn't demand her isolation, who didn't require fear. One night, Adaku confessed that she had always felt an emptiness in her heart, a feeling that perhaps she was meant for something more than the rituals and sacrifices she had been taught. Chibuzor told her about Christ, and though she struggled to understand, a spark of hope lit up her eyes. She was ready to believe. 10 days later they had consulted 10 powerful Dibias from different areas who agreed to do the sacrifice themselves and cleanse the village of their sins. So they brought Adaku and Chibuzor from the secret hut to the village square. I can still remember the cries that filled the village square that night, the chaos, the fear, the shock. We had gathered, expecting to see the wrath of the gods, to watch 10 powerful Dibias put an end to the curse that we thought had befallen us. But instead, we watched in horror as each one fell, struck down by a force we couldn't understand. By the time the last Dibia fell, the air was so thick with silence you could hear every whispered breath. Even the elders, men who had always stood unshaken, looked lost, helpless. People were muttering, hands clutched to their chests, casting nervous glances at Chibuzor and Adaku, as if they were something otherworldly. But the strangest thing happened. Instead of gloating or celebrating their survival, Chibuzor looked around with calm, his eyes soft and full of something I couldn't quite place. He raised his hands and spoke, not in anger, but with a voice full of warmth, like he wasn't talking down to us but inviting us to listen. I serve the God who loves, who forgives, he said, his voice carrying through the square. This God does not want sacrifices or fear. He asks for our hearts, our love. His name is Jesus. The elders, once proud and certain of their ways, looked shaken. One by one, their heads dropped, and eventually, the chief elder spoke up, his voice barely a whisper. Show us, this God of yours. It felt as if the whole village exhaled, a collective sigh of relief and surrender. Chibuzor knelt in the mud with the elders, Adaku by his side, and led them in prayer. I had never seen anything like it. The people I had feared all my life were crying, humbled, asking for forgiveness. I couldn't hold back my own tears, either. It felt like something had broken, something dark and heavy that had held our village captive for generations. In the days that followed, the village changed. Chibuzor and Adaku didn't stop at just one prayer. They stayed with us, day after day, teaching us about Jesus, reading from a tattered old Bible Chibuzor carried everywhere. They taught us hymns and shared stories of hope, tales of people who found peace and healing in the faith they now offer to us. Soon, the elders themselves decided that we needed a proper place to gather, a church. Everyone pitched in, even those who had been skeptical at first, working from dawn till dusk. We used stones from the river, timber from the forest, and our own sweat and hands to build it. It wasn't grand or fancy, just a small building with walls of clay and a roof thatched with palm leaves, but it was beautiful to us. It was ours. Chibuzor and Adaku became our teachers, and every morning, they would gather the village under the thatched roof, telling us stories of Jesus, guiding us in prayer. They didn't force anyone to believe, they invited us to come as we were, to learn and see for ourselves. And over time, one by one, people opened their hearts. Adaku, our former priestess, took on a new role. She was no longer the feared figure dressed in white robes, carrying out rituals. Now, she wore simple clothes, like any one of us, but her presence was still powerful. There was a gentleness in her that I hadn't seen before, a kindness that drew people in. Children adored her, they would run to her, laughing, and she would teach them songs about love and faith, her voice soft and warm. Chibuzor, with his calm and steady way, took on those who wanted to learn more deeply. He started a small group of men and women who were willing to go beyond the village, to spread the message of love and hope they had found. He called them pastors, people who would shepherd others, like he and Adaku had done for us. He taught them with patience, guiding them through scripture, prayer, and the ways of Jesus. He wanted them to know that their role wasn't to impose or demand but to invite, to serve. Over the years, the small church in our village grew. It became a place of healing, of celebration, and yes, even of mourning. But everything felt different now. There was no fear, no dread of what the gods might do if we didn't perform the right rituals. Instead, there was peace, a lightness in the air, a freedom to love and forgive. Chibuzor and Adaku eventually got married, a simple ceremony that brought the whole village together in joy. They had each found something precious in each other, a love that neither tradition nor fear could hold back. They continued their work together, side by side, guiding the village with faith and compassion. Watching them, I often felt grateful. They had saved us not only from fear but also from ourselves, showing us a new path. As the years passed, word of what had happened in our village spread. People from neighboring villages came to see for themselves, curious about the strange church in Udo and the man who had once been destined for juju but chose Jesus instead. Some came skeptically, others desperate for hope, and slowly, they too found a new beginning. Chibuzor and Adaku didn't stop with our village. They started traveling, taking their message to places that had never heard of Jesus, visiting villages where fear and superstition still ruled. They told their story, how a former priestess and the son of a juju priest had found peace in a different way. Some villages rejected them, others listened, but they never lost their calm, their patience. They knew that even if just one person found the same peace they had, it was worth it. Over time, Chibuzor and Adaku's work grew beyond anything we could have imagined. They traveled far, and their story was carried even further by those they had taught. Some of the young men and women from our village who had been trained by Chibuzor went on to become pastors themselves, spreading the message across towns and borders. Eventually, they went global, sharing their story in cities and countries far from the small village where it had all begun.